Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Poetry Thursday, a battered little tough weed of a BookTube event where just a handful of us read a poem to you on Thursday. And one of those handfuls sometimes gasses on about the poem as well. I'll let you guess who that is. But I am working my way on Poetry Thursdays through this big anthology, big heavy thing. You can't really appreciate how heavy it is in a video, but it's heavier than a normal book its size. This is 20th century American poetry. Nice big fat anthology that collects, as you can tell from the title, the kind of poetry that comes from the era and the place where I believe poetry went to die. So having an anthology like this to challenge me is a delight. It hasn't really done so yet because I'm reading it in order. And we haven't reached the mid-1950s. We haven't reached the point where poetry as an understood genre for a general readership died. And it has not come back, except in very limited ways. It has not come back. We haven't reached that point yet. So I haven't really had much of a problem with what we're doing yet so far on Poetry Thursday. We will get there. We will get to rough waters with this book, I imagine in the dog days of summer. But right now we're at Edwin Arlington Robinson, who's a wonderful, wonderful American poet. I think the editors of this book, this is edited by Dana Gioia, David Mason, and Meg Shorkey. I think that they, or whoever they got to write the introductions here, refer to Edwin Arlington Robinson as the first great American modern poet. He was born in Maine and had a completely luckless life, a largely joyless life, that he helped to darken with alcoholism. He was like his brother, one of his brothers. I would argue both his brothers and his family. He was just a hopeless alcoholic. And the main bright spot in his life came from a place that you might not expect. It came from Theodore Roosevelt. President Theodore Roosevelt was first acquainted by a friend who knew Roosevelt. I mock him plenty. I razz him plenty on this channel. But he was an indefatigable reader. Never stopped. Read like nobody's business. Read the guts out of books. And a friend of his, acquainted him with the poetry of Robinson and then with Robinson himself. And Roosevelt was shocked, not only by Robinson's genius, which had up to that point been known only to a handful of critics, but also by his incredible poverty. So Roosevelt gave him a job. He gave him what we would call now a no-show government job, meaning all Robinson had to do was make a token gesture of the fact that he was still alive, the very smallest gesture of accountability. In his case, we would use a no-show government job would be something like you get the foreman to clock you in. You don't ever actually go there, but someone does clock you in and out every day, and therefore you get your paycheck and your benefits. In Robinson's day, that meant that he had to go to work and leave a newspaper from that day. He had to prove that he'd been there, physically been there. And Roosevelt's idea was good here. Roosevelt, he had his time being a dude rancher out in the middle of nowhere and living from, beans in cans and whatnot. But he came from money. It was in his DNA. And it was his assumption that if the bare necessities of life were provided for, well, then the poet would flourish. I don't know that if you look at Robinson's poetry in the course of his life, I don't know that is verified. I don't know that you can see an uptick in either productivity or quality in his verse during the years when he didn't have to worry about money. I don't know about that. In my heart of hearts, I don't think that it would be true because the alcoholism stayed. And that kills your writing. No matter what you may have heard, from alcoholic writers, that kills your writing. It's an enormous boulder that you have to move out of the way before you can get any work done on any given day. No matter what some romantic writers who want to gild the lily of their own drug addiction might have said over the ages, it's the ultimate obstacle to writing, not the ultimate benefit to writing. And that was true of Robinson for every day that he drew a breath. So I don't know. I like the gesture of largesse on Roosevelt's part. Critic though I may be of some of the ways that he acted in the world, he had a flair for the heroic gesture, and he meant it. And he could make it work, and it did work for Robinson for a while. There's no lessening the impact this would have had on his life. For a while, he didn't have to worry. He didn't have to live hand to mouth. That ended when Roosevelt's successor, William Howard Taft, took office. Taft was not a big fan of people doing only nominal work in order to get their government pay, except when it came to the office of president. But the gravy train for Robinson ended then. But the poems kept happening right up until the end. I think he was working on a poem or the revision of a poem on the day that he slipped into a coma. So he worked his whole life, and his poetry is wonderful. If you ever come across a little volume of his poetry, definitely give it a try. You see here in his poetry him just running riot in all of the formal forms and structures of poetry. It never occurred to him to just do whatever he felt. Instead, he did the work and the endless practice to master those forms, which I only stress because that's not going to stay true in the course of this book. but I thought I'd read you a couple of his poems. They're a little bit on the short side, and also to show you a little bit of that form. So we'll read. They're all in their own way famous. There aren't so many Edwin Arlington Robinson poems that they aren't all famous. But we'll read a couple. We'll read, for instance, a lyric called Miniver TV. A lyric is a specific form and rhythm of poetry, a specific scansion. And this is a lovely example of it, and gives you a little insight into Robinson's mind, which was always a weird combination of kind and caustic. Miniver Cheevy, child of scorn, grew lean while he assailed the seasons. He wept that he was ever born, and he had reasons. Miniver loved the days of old, when swords were bright and steeds were prancing. The vision of a warrior bold would set him dancing. Miniver sighed for what was not, and dreamed and rested from his labors. He dreamed of Thebes and Camelot and Priam's neighbors. Miniver mourned the ripe renown that made so many names so fragrant. He mourned romance now on the town, and art a vagrant. Miniver loved the Medici, albeit he'd never seen one. He would have smiled incessantly could he have been one. Miniver cursed the commonplace and eyed a khaki suit with loathing. He missed the medieval grace of iron clothing. Miniver scorned the gold he sought, but sore annoyed was he without it. Miniver thought and thought and thought and thought about it. Miniver Cheevy, born too late, scratched his head and kept on thinking. Miniver coughed and called it fate, and kept on drinking. So this is an unsparing view of this dreamy, useless main character. Can't help but think that it looks a lot inward. It looks a lot at Robinson himself. And you can see right away, even if you aren't familiar with the formal categories of romance, you can see right away that this is meant to be sung. It's meant to create a rhythm that forces itself on your reading of it. Even a ham-handed reading like mine, you could tell the rhythm was just making itself known. Then we'll do another one. We'll do another little poem here for Edwin Arlington Robinson, who had to show up in this anthology. We'll do The House on the Hill, which is a villanelle. They are all gone away. The house is shut and still. There is nothing more to say. Through broken walls and gray, the wind blows bleak and shrill. They are all gone away. Nor is there one today to speak them good or ill. There is nothing more to say. Why is it then we stray around the sunken sill? They are all gone away, and our poor fancy play for them is wasted skill. There is nothing more to say. There is ruin and decay in the house on the hill. They are all gone away. There is nothing more to say. Which is an excellent example. It's an excellent poem just on, if you break it down, the poetics there. But it's also lovely. I don't know. When it comes to formal poetry like this, I love that it applies to your life. I love that it isn't just a game of guessing the author's autobiography. And just on just a demotic level, this is lovely because it reminds me of things that I have seen and wondered about. I have come across old abandoned houses, not necessarily on hills, but still old abandoned houses that are sunken in and silvered wood and entirely gone. They are entirely gone. It's not like if you went to the county deeds office, you could learn anything about that house or who built it or when or who lived there and what they dreamed and what they laughed about. You couldn't learn anything about that. There isn't any way to connect places like that with history. They are gone. There's nothing left to say. There's no one there anymore, and there's no trace of them. The house is there, but you can't reclaim any part of the living reality of that place. I used to see, when I was out tramping around this country and other countries, I would see places like that all the time. And always have that thought, and often have this poem in mind when I did. So there you go. That is Poetry Thursday for today. That is Edwin Arlington Robinson, a wonderful, wonderful American poet. And we will move on. Next Poetry Thursday, we are creeping closer we're slouching towards Bethlehem to be born. We are creeping closer and closer to the. Right now, this is wine and cheese for me on Poetry Thursday. But with this anthology, I'm going to stick with this anthology for the rest of the year. And with me for Poetry Thursday, this is now completely easy, because we're still dealing with poetry that wants to be liked by anybody, that wants to be read and appreciated for its beauty and its skill. And that's going to change. Oh, BookTube, that's going to change. Unless these editors pull off a miracle. I have not read ahead in this thing. They could pull off a miracle. We shall see. But I don't think those fireworks are coming next time either. So I'll wrap this up for now. That is Poetry Thursday. Little Edwin Arlington Robinson for your consideration. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.